So as you notice, this is not the normal scheduled program because, well, I'm going to be honest. It might have gained me some viewers, but I had to delete the video because I didn't want to get banned. But my wife came in behind us, buck ass naked, which probably would have got me more viewers, but would have also got my channel banned. Which I was hot, to say the least, because I told her before 7 o'clock, live stream. It's Wednesday. Now I was supposed to be at karate training right now, but I decided instead of throwing her across the room to go for a walk, because yeah, I don't want to be that guy. I'll be honest, I'm tired of stupid people. And that includes, that's all of you. American, Brazilian, I don't care what country your fucking stupid comes from. I'm tired of it. Get a fucking life. Read a fucking book. Do I sound upset? That's because I'm tired of it. I'm tired of having to live among it. I'm tired of having to listen to it. I'm tired of you, and that's everybody. All of you. I don't care if I hurt your fucking feelings. And I keep hearing this. You don't respect me. Respect is fucking earned. It's not given. I don't have to give you respect. I have to give you dignity, like the dignity to live, until you do something fucking stupid like try to kill me, and then that's out the window too. I'll just snap you in half and call it a fucking day. I don't care. Waiting for the chat to open because even my computer is it's Chinese because that's all you can get in Brazil because this is a Chinese colony. Because Joe Biden, why would you send the CIA, the military down here to threaten Bolsonaro not to make waves about the election right after you sent chips from Taiwan that were supposed to be for the American military to Brazil to run their election machines? Weird, huh? But we're not supposed to ask those questions. Yeah, Trump is the dictator. Right. Yes, I had this long, like, you know how I do it. I have stuff I've recorded during the week, like a journal, like politics. And this week I had one about Carroll. I was going to dissect his tactics because I've seen him 1,000 times. And about the fascism that supposedly is in America, yet you can call the president a fascist and not get killed. Weird, because I've been to, well, not fascist, but countries that, even here I'm still up in the air about because, I'm an American and I'm a prior military. Maybe they don't like me. Actually, maybe I'll still play that. I don't know. It's available right here. Yeah, screw it. It's late, but I'll play it. And you guys can, do what you want. Tonight we're running 3 field tests on modern loudmouth culture. First, the one-up Olympics. The predictable little species who can't discuss, only compete. And when they start losing, they don't get smarter, they get smaller. Second, fascism for dummies. Because if you can post your riot fantasies, buy tactical gear and LARP resistance online with 0 consequences, you're not living under fascism, you're living under a system so permissive it even allows its own parody. Third, the chivalry audit, a basic ledger check, compare what people say to what they do, and watch the equality sermons collapse the second they touch risk, duty, and responsibility. If you're here for therapy, language, and soft lighting, wrong channel. If you're here for pattern recognition, receipts, and blunt truths, good. Let's get to work.
Every time I tried to stand, they pushed me down. Now I've had enough, can't take it all around. It's time to be strong, time to be clear. No more being used, it's time to repair. No more Mr. Nice Guy, I'm through. Time to stand up, let the world see. No more being weak, it's time to break. I'm done with the pain, I'll take my place.
It is Monday, January 26th at 5:04 p.m. and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. Let's talk about a very predictable species, the one-up guy. The man who can't discuss, he can only compete. And when he starts losing, he doesn't get smarter, he gets smaller. Here's the pattern. Clean and clinical. Carol Sanders starts with the posture. Not evidence, not argument, posture. He leads with a drive-by label from a self-published Dunning-Kruger effect author. Translation for adults, I don't have an answer, so I'll try status games. Now watch the pivot, because the one-up guy has one move. He tries to stand taller by pushing you shorter. So you post your work, your book's page, your receipts, the civilized thing, and instead of engaging the content, he immediately tries to reframe you as a joke, not your claims, you. That's the first tell. When a man argues personhood, not propositions, he has already confessed defeat. Then you hit him with a simple truth. You basically say, look, you could have stayed quiet, and everyone would notice you had no coherent response. Which, yes, is blunt, but it's also accurate. And his response isn't reflection. It's escalation. He wants the crowd to know who you meant. He insists he has nothing to hide. Then he takes the next step. He tries to turn your accomplishments into something pathological. He calls Dunning-Kruger a mental illness, and he smears you as a walking political opinion page. Then, because he's out of ideas, he goes for the sneer. Weird, it would appear that the
magic
video
man
here
in
is
the
out of
sky
sync,
doing?
but whatever. Now, class, notice what just happened. He goes from, that is literally my night. Not even lying. From trying to one-up you to trying to diminish you the moment you call out the nonsense. This is not random. It's a common psychological sequence. Step 1, establish dominance with a label. Step 2, get challenged. Step 3, shift from I'm better than you to you're not even worthy. That's the move. It's textbook, because if he can't win on substance, he tries to win by lowering the definition of winning. And I'm going to say this slowly for the loony left in the back who thinks sneering is scholarship. Mockery is not an argument. Calling someone Dunning-Kruger is not an argument. Declaring a cognitive bias a mental illness is not an argument. It's a tantrum in academic cosplay. It's what happens when somebody wants an aesthetic of intelligence without the discipline of it. Now, let's dissect the mechanics. Carol's opening shot was not, your claim is wrong because. It was, from a self-published. He's trying to make the venue the verdict, as if published is a priestly caste system. As if the idea Ideas don't matter unless a gatekeeper stamps them. That's not reasoning, that's class anxiety. Then you respond, and he can. Oh, yeah. Yes, folks, I am willing to argue the points in my books and all my writings. It would appear the loony left is not. He can't address what you actually said, so he reaches for the internet's favorite magic spell. Your Dunning-Kruger is definitely showing. Again, translation, I'm going to call you overconfident so I don't have to show confidence, level, math, or sources, or logic, or even a coherent paragraph. And right there, you see the game change. Because when you call him out, he stops trying to appear superior and starts trying to make you appear contemptible. That's the difference between a rival and a saboteur. A rival tries to win. A saboteur tries to ruin. Now, I'm going to be condescending since some people need the help. If you're listening, Carol, here's the remedial lesson. If you think someone is wrong, you show where. You show why. You show what would change your mind. If all you have is labeling, you're not debating, you're preening. And preening is what birds do, not thinkers. So what's the takeaway for the audience? If you've ever had a Carol in your life, and you have, here's how you spot the pivot. 1. They start with a sneer, not a citation. 2. When pressed, they demand everyone knows something as if volume equals validation. 3. They convert disagreement into diagnosis, mentally ill, delusional, crazy, because they can't tolerate the possibility that you're sane and they're wrong. 4. When all else fails, they go religious. Not theology, not philosophy, just the playground-lined magic man in the sky. That's not courage, that's arrested development. And this is why the loony left style of argument collapses in real life. Because real life has invoices. Real life has outcomes. Real life has consequences. You can't ratio your way into a working economy. You can't meme your way into moral seriousness. You can't sneer your way into a coherent worldview. Now let me make this useful, because you're not just here for a roast. You're here for a pattern recognition upgrade. So here's what you do when the one-up guy turns into the diminisher. First, stay on the claim. Drag it back to substance. Which part is wrong? Quote me, then refute it. Second, force standards. What evidence would change your mind? People who are performing hate standards. Standards expose them. Third, name the tactic. Not with therapy jargon, with plain English. You're dodging. You're insulting. You're substituting contempt for argument. Fourth, do not chase their frame. If they call you self-published, you don't beg for status. You point out that ideas stand or fall by reasoning, not by who claps. And finally, this part matters. Remember what the diminisher is really doing. He's not evaluating your accomplishments. He's reacting to them. He sees output, he feels smaller. So he tries to make your output illegitimate because admitting your competence would require him to confront his own emptiness. That is the whole game. Carroll didn't discover flaws. He reached for insults when he ran out of thinking. And the moment you called out the bluff, he stopped trying to look bigger than you and started trying to make you look smaller than yourself. That's not debate. That's a coping strategy. A bad one. So if you're watching this play out on Facebook, at work, in your family, don't be surprised. Don't be flattered, and don't be derailed. The one-up guy also only has two modes, compete or condescend. And the second one is what happens when the first one fails. Let me explain this slowly. If you can post online about riding, biting tactical gear, and rehearsing your little resistance fantasies, and no one shows up at your house, then you are not living under fascism. Fascist states do not tolerate rehearsal. They do not wait for your manifesto to hit 1,000 likes. They do not let you crowdfund paranoia, sell merch, and live stream your moral panic. They act quietly, efficiently, early. A Nazi government does not let its enemies LARP revolution on social media, monetize victimhood, and then log off for dinner. The fact that you can do this loudly, repeatedly, and with zero consequences is not evidence of tyranny. It is evidence of a system so permissive it tolerates even its own parody. Authoritarianism is not defined by your feelings. It is defined by state capacity and state willingness. No knock at the door. No frozen content accounts, no presses shut down, no organizers disappeared, then the regime you're screaming about exists only in your rhetoric, not in reality. So when the so-called fascist state lets you cosplay resistance indefinitely, the only thing being exposed is your illiteracy in history. That's not oppression, that's embarrassment. This one is going to piss some people off because I got news for you. A concealed carry permit is a privilege. Carrying a gun is a right. I think open carry should be the rule. Why? People are much more polite when they know you can defend yourself. But whatever. It's Friday, January 30th at 8:38 a.m. and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. A video surfaces. The internet does what it always does. It picks a side, picks a saint, picks a villain, and then picks a fight with anyone who refuses to clap on command. This time the name floating around is Alex Preddy. Minneapolis, January 13th, 2026. He is in a street confrontation with federal immigration agents. He's screaming. He appears to spit. And then, because apparently the adult brain is optional, he kicks out the taillight of a federal vehicle. A handgun is visible in his waistband. He doesn't draw it, but the fact that it's there is the point. He gets taken to the ground. And now the predictable chorus starts. See, he was crazy. See, he was dangerous. See, he deserved. Stop. Just stop. If your moral reasoning... He may not have been deserved to get shot, but he definitely deserved to lose his carry permit and maybe spend a little time in jail to cool off, because that's not ICE's job to arrest people for, what he did. That's actually Minneapolis's police's job, public safety. ICE's job is to arrest the illegals and deport them. Big difference. Begins with and ends with the word deserved. You're not thinking. You're auditioning for a mob. Here's the opinion, stated cleanly. Someone who behaves like that, publicly escalating, vandalizing, spitting, screaming, and doing it all while armed, has no business carrying a concealed firearm in public under a state-issued permit. Not because firearms are mystical talismans of evil, not because the Constitution suddenly expires when someone is irritating, but because concealed carry is not a vibe, it's a responsibility. It's a public safety credential. It's a grown... Oh no, I used that one word that loony leftists are allergic to. Responsibility. Not bargain. Society gives you extraordinary latitude on the assumption that you have extraordinary restraint. And what we're watching on that video is not restraint, it's volatility. Now let me do something rare on the internet. Separate two different questions that lazy people love to mash into one. Question 1. Should he have had a carry permit? Question 2. Was the later shooting justified? Those are not the same question. Only a simple mind or a dishonest one treats them like interchangeable Lego bricks. You can believe the shooting deserves intense scrutiny, because it does. And also believe the state should not hand out concealed carry permissions to people who demonstrate violent, impulsive public behavior. Let's talk about what that permit actually means. I'll be honest, I think open carry, if you had to open carry your handgun, you would know who the criminals were because they wouldn't be carrying a handgun. Also, you probably wouldn't act that retarded because people can see your firearm and they're going to treat you differently. In theory, it means you've met a standard. You've cleared background checks. You've demonstrated minimal competence, minimal lawfulness, minimal stability. Enough that the state says, fine, you can carry a loaded weapon in public where nobody can see it. That is not a small thing. That's not a souvenir. That's not a political statement. That is the state betting that you won't turn a bad day into a homicide scene. And if you cannot keep your hands to yourself around federal officers and their vehicles, if you cannot stop yourself from escalating into spitting and property damage, then the state's bet is bad. Full stop. And before the absolutists start hyperventilating, no, I am not saying you have to be a monk to carry. I'm saying you have to be an adult. There is a difference. Here's the uncomfortable truth that people who fetishize rights without responsibilities don't like to hear. A concealed firearm is not just a tool, it's an accelerant. It changes every confrontation you enter. It changes what impulse costs. It changes what rage can do in 10 seconds. So if you're the type of person who goes from annoyed to kicking taillights and I'll be honest, anyone who wants to own a firearm should have to go through a training program. Because guess what, dumbasses? Every last one of you is in the unorganized militia. You should be trained at a minimum like a militia. Sorry, if you're going to use that word or the Second Amendment, well, you got to do the whole program. Public, you've already demonstrated the exact temperament that should disqualify you from carrying concealed. Obviously, the video is not a clinical diagnosis. It doesn't prove a psychiatric condition. It proves something simpler and honestly more relevant to public safety. Dysregulated aggression, poor judgment, a willingness to escalate in public while armed. That's enough for me to say, permit? No. Because the standard for should you be licensed to carry a hidden firearm should be higher than the standard. Again, if he was open carrying, when he started acting the ass, they would have just pulled their guns and he probably would have backed down. But he wasn't, so he ended up dead. For did you commit a felony last week? If your standards are lower than that, your permit system is basically decorative. And that is the core problem. Far too many people think a carry permit should be easy to get and impossible to lose. That is childish. That is how you get tragedies, both for officers and for civilians, because the state refuses to filter out people whose behavior screams, I am a risk. Now let's address the other half, the later shooting. Preddy was killed in a separate encounter on January 24, 2026. The government is reviewing what happened. The involved agents were placed on administrative leave. Good. That's what review looks like in a functioning society. But understand what administrative leave means. It's not a conviction. It's a pause while facts are gathered. And anyone who... Jimmy and I were kind of put on not administrative leave, but we had to take a little break to fill out some sworn statements after he hit a building with a tank gun. Yeah. Declares open and shut on day one is not engaged in analysis. They're engaged in team sports. The existence of an earlier ugly video does not automatically justify a later use of deadly force. That is a moral non-inference. Past obnoxious behavior does not create an on-demand death sentence. If you think it does, you are not defending law and order, you're defending vengeance. So here's the adult position. 1. The video is relevant to whether he should have been permitted to carry concealed. 2. The video is not a blank check for whatever happened later. If you can't hold both thoughts, your politics is just a toddler tantrum with a podcast microphone. Now, what should happen in a sane system? First, permits should be subject to swift temporary suspension when there is credible evidence of violent public conduct. You know what's sad when you're listening to yourself and in your head you go, no shit. Especially conduct involving threats, assaults, or destruction while armed. Suspension is not permanent revocation. It's a safety pause. Second, there should be due process, real process, not bureaucratic games, not political favoritism. If you want a permit restored, you show you can behave like a stable adult. Period. Third, training should include what most training avoids because it's not glamorous: emotional control, de-escalation, and legal boundaries. Because a concealed carry holder is not a vigilante. He is not Batman. He is a citizen entrusted with lethal capability and expected to avoid using it. And if that offends you, I should probably point out I'm a master firearms instructor, a combat shooting instructor. I was an executive protection specialist, and I've never had an incident with a firearm. Also, I have books published on the topics. So, yeah. Somebody please lecture me. I dare you. If you hear standards and you start whining about oppression, then you are exactly the person I do not want carrying a loaded handgun next to me in a grocery store. Let me make this even clearer for the people in the back who insist on misunderstanding everything. I am not arguing against lawful carry. I'm arguing against putting firearms in the hands of people who demonstrate they cannot regulate themselves in public. A gun doesn't create bad character, but it makes bad character catastrophically efficient. And if your permit system cannot distinguish between a calm, competent citizen and a public agitator who kicks out taillights in a rage, then your permit system is not a safeguard. It's a rubber stamp. So, when you say maybe someone like that shouldn't have had a carry permit, you're not saying something radical. You're saying something painfully obvious. And if you behave like a hazard, you should not be granted the privilege of concealed carry, at least not until you've proven you can behave like a rational adult again. And the final point. You want to put veterans to work, like old Navy SEALs and infantry and snipers and stuff. Have them teach civilians how not to be retards with firearms. It was their job for many of them over 20 years. That was their job. Their whole job were firearms and tactics. But we're not going to do that because we want stupid people to have guns. Because it's a right, which it is. But it's also a responsibility. Everybody keeps skipping the responsibility part. And that's the problem. Because this is where the media and the mobs will lie to you. Holding someone to a higher standard for concealed carry is not anti-gun. It's pro-responsibility. It's pro-public safety. It's the only intellectually coherent way to defend the right to carry while reducing the number of predictable disasters that give opponents ammunition. Pun fully intended. If you want the public to respect lawful carry, then stop pretending every applicant is a saint and every permit is a trophy. Concealed carry permit should mean this person can control themselves. It's Sunday, February 1st at 6:16 p.m. and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. Tonight's segment is called The Epstein Paper Mountain. So here we are again, another dump, another release, another bureaucratic fire hose of paper designed to look like accountability while making sure nobody can actually follow the money, follow the facilitators, or follow the institutional cowardice to its logical end. Here's what's new and what's not. The U.S. Department of Justice says it has released over 3 million additional pages tied to Jeffrey Epstein, plus more than 2,000 videos, and roughly 180,000 images under something called the Epstein Files Transparency Act. That additional release brings the total to nearly 3.5 million pages, according to DOJ. That is not a file, that is a library, and when the state hands you a library, it's not doing it because it loves literacy, it's doing it because it knows most people don't have the time, the tools, or the patience to read what matters. Now, the political class is already doing what it always does, treating the release like a Rorschach test. If you hate one tribe, you'll cherry-pick names to smear that tribe. If you love another tribe, you'll suddenly discover due process, and we can't jump to conclusions, so let's establish 2 adult rules right now. Rule 1, a name in a document is not a conviction. Rule 2, no new charges is not the same as nothing happened. People keep confusing social proximity with criminal proof. Epstein wasn't running a book club. He was running a network. Networks include parasites, opportunists, enablers, and yes, people who wandered into his orbit because power attracts flies. So when documents mention a public figure, that can mean anything from had dinner once to was part of the machinery. The problem is, we've been trained to treat anything short of a courtroom verdict as nothing, and anything with a famous name as everything. Both are childish. Now, what's actually coming out of this release? One major development is that reputable outlets are reporting details pulled from communications in the newly released materials, particularly around prominent relationships Epstein cultivated and maintained. For example, coverage out today highlights communications involving Prince Andrew and references to continued contact after Epstein's 2010 house arrest period and attempts by Epstein to shape public narratives around himself. And separately, the Associated Press reports that a top DOJ official, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, has publicly downplayed the likelihood of further charges arising from what's been released, even while acknowledging the material is disturbing. Let me say that again slowly. The material can be disturbing, troubling, obscene, beyond the pale, but not chargeable, not prosecutable, not meeting the legal standard. That might be legally true and might also be institutionally convenient because the public doesn't just want a moral statement. The public wants to know who knew, when they knew, who looked away, who made the phone calls, who signed the non-prosecution deals, who lost the evidence, who misplaced the hard drive, who ran interference. And this is where the dump format becomes a tactic. Now, I asked a loony leftist today because a FBI memo came out that said Trump called the local police department about Epstein in 2006. I said, well, what if, and I didn't say that it had come out. I didn't, share the news story. I said, well, what if Trump had called the local authorities about Epstein in 2006? You know what I got? A laughing face emoji. You know what that means? They don't care about evidence. They only care about hating Trump. Period. That's all it's about.
Are you fucking getting it yet?
A real transparency release is curated, indexed, searchable, and structured so normal people can audit power. A chaos release is a document avalanche, technically, public, practically unusable. DOJ's Epstein Library portal explicitly warns that the material contains descriptions of sexual assault and it's structured into multiple data sets, which is good as far as it goes. But here's what always happens. The public ends up doing the labor the state should have done in the first place. Triage, cross-referencing, organizing, building indexes, because otherwise the truth stays buried under its own weight. And of course, the internet did what the internet does. People started consolidating, reformatting, and making searchable packages so that this isn't just a bureaucratic hostage situation. Now, before the hall monitors start fainting into their fainting couches, let me say something obvious. Do not circulate victim-identifying material. Do not dox. Do not play vigilante with rumors. Citizen research doesn't mean citizen lynch mob. It means take claims seriously but not stupidly. Here's the bigger point. This Epstein file dump is not simply about Epstein. Epstein is dead. The story is about institutions. The ones. My favorite is Trump is mentioned in the files. Yeah. So are the cows on The View, your point? That failed, the ones that protected reputations, the ones that negotiated special outcomes, the ones that treated poor girls like collateral damage and rich men like delicate china. When a government releases millions of pages, it's implicitly admitting something. Either it sat on this material for years, or it never bothered to make sense of it. Or it made sense of it and decided you didn't need to know. Pick your poison. And then there's the redaction problem. Any ethical release must protect victims. Full stop. But that principle can be abused in two directions. One direction is the obvious one. Victims get exposed, re-traumatized, turned into content. That is evil. The other direction is more subtle. Redactions get used to protect not the vulnerable, but the well-connected. Victim protection becomes a blanket. And under that blanket, reputation. I just remembered this records when I go live, so my wife, buck ass naked, is on my computer. And sleep like babies. If you want a society where predators fear consequences, you don't hide the adults and expose the children. You do the opposite. Now I'm going to make a point that will annoy the professional opinion class. This is what elite accountability looks like in the modern West. A maximum release, minimum clarity document flood. Enough transparency to say we complied, not enough structure to say you can verify. And then the talking heads will lecture you about not spreading conspiracy theories while simultaneously refusing to demand hard answers about why Epstein got sweetheart deals, how he acquired protection, and why this story has more dead ends than a government parking garage. Let's talk about how you should read this dump if you want truth and not dopamine. First, separate 3 categories. Category 1, primary evidence, emails, calendars, flight logs, financial records, signed agreements, internal memos. Category 2, secondary assertions. Person A said person B did X. Useful but not proof. Category 3, cultural noise. Screenshots of captions about vibes, worthless. Second, watch for patterns, not just names. One name is gossip. 10 repeated touch points across years is a relationship. Repeated scheduling, repeated logistics, repeated facilitation. That is where networks show themselves. Third, keep your standards consistent. If your brain turns off when it's your side, you're not researching, you're worshiping. You also have to look at the context because Epstein mentioned Trump like 380,000 times. And a lot of those were not flattering. He was actually talking to Democrats during a hearing about Trump. So, yeah, they were best friends, according to the loony left. But the loony left were talking to Epstein to try to take down Trump. I find that weird. Don't you? Now, why does this matter today? Because Epstein was not a one-off monster who appeared out of the fog and then vanished like a ghost story. He was a symptom of a culture where money launders morality, where access becomes innocence, and where institutions are trained to protect themselves before they protect children. If you want the next Epstein to be harder to build, you don't start by screaming online. You start by demanding structural reforms, real victim-first procedures, real digital evidence retention rules, real independent review of non-prosecution deals, real consequences for officials who bury or sabotage cases, real transparency that comes with an index, not a dump truck. And to everyone using this dump as a partisan club, let me simplify your life. If you think Epstein was bad only because he might embarrass your political enemies, you are not moral, you are tribal. If you think every person mentioned is guilty, you are not moral, you are lazy. If you think nothing matters unless there's a new conviction tomorrow, you are not moral, you are pacified. Adult thinking is harder. That's why most people avoid it. So here's what I'm watching in the next phase. 1, whether the DOJ continues to release materials and whether those releases become more usable over time, not less. 2, whether serious investigative teams produce corroborated reporting based on primary documents, not vibes. 3, whether lawmakers use this as a fundraising prop or as leverage for actual policy changes. And 4, whether the public learns the most important lesson of all. Power does not confess. Power has to be audited. The Epstein story has always been a test, not of your outrage. Outrage is easy. A toddler can do outrage. It's a test of whether you can hold 2 truths at once. That victims must be protected and that institutions must be exposed. If you can do both, you're ahead of 90% of the commentary class. Because the real scandal isn't that the files exist. The real scandal is how long it took to get them and how hard they are to read once you do. That's the Epstein paper mountain. And that's Shawn thinking out loud. It is Sunday, February 1st at 6:28 p.m. and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. Tonight's episode is for the people who confuse a name and a document with proof of a crime. If that's you, don't worry, you're not alone, you're just loudly. I was listening to what's his name? The Special Forces guy who was a Virginia representative. It'll come to me at some point after the podcast, I'm sure. But he said about all the names and evidence and stuff. Shouldn't we be on to in the wood chipper phase now? As a matter of fact, I think more crimes should carry the death penalty. For example, irritating me should carry the death penalty, but definitely pedophilia. However, also making false claims against a man should also carry the same penalty that pedophilia and rape and all the other stuff. Or grape. I guess you have to say grape. What the fuck is wrong with people? Anyway, I think they should all carry the same penalty. Call me weird. Unqualified. Let's set the rule for adults. Allegations are not evidence, and evidence is not vibes. A document dump is not a conviction, and I saw it on social media is not a legal standard. I should probably add, I hate Trump is also not a conviction, just like his 32 felonies. If you go onto my webpage over on Academic Writings by Shawn, or the Super Gringo, Shawn Armstrong, you'll see a page there called The 32 Felonies, where an actual Democratic analyst or strategist says, yeah, it was bullshit. All of that was bullshit. So, yeah. Actually, I'm not, sad they did it because it actually won him the election in 2024. Unless you're being sentenced by a committee of unemployed Reddit moderators. Here's what we can say cleanly, factually, and without conspiracy cosplay. First, the government has released multiple tranches of Epstein-related material under a disclosure process, including what DOJ describes as a first phase of declassified files, with more intended after review and redaction to protect victims. Second, and this is the part that melts brains, Donald Trump's name appearing in Epstein-associated material is not automatically evidence of wrongdoing. Even mainstream coverage of the early Phase 1 release described Trump's name appearing in things like a contact book and flight logs. Let me translate that into English. Contacts and logs show connections, not crimes. So what do the released materials and major reporting say about Trump specifically? ABC reported that in that Phase 1 release, Trump's name appeared in the redacted contact book and that he was listed as a passenger on Epstein's plane multiple times in the 1990s, mostly between Palm Beach and the New York area, including a documented flight that included members of the Trump's family. Now watch carefully. None of that by itself proves sex trafficking, abuse, or participation in Epstein's crimes. It proves travel. It proves association. That's it. If you want to make the leap from flew on a plane to committed a felony, you need more than imagination and a Wi-Fi signal. And here's the next uncomfortable fact. Uncomfortable for the people who treat accusations as a hobby. AP's reporting has explicitly stated that Trump has not been accused of wrongdoing in connection with Epstein. Let's repeat it slowly so it reaches the back row. Not accused of wrongdoing in connection with Epstein. Does that mean Trump is a saint? No. It means the claim the files prove Trump did X is not supported by what's been publicly substantiated in these releases as reported by major outlets. Now, the obvious counter is, what about victims? Good. Let's talk about what prominent Epstein accusers said, because that's where people love to lie by omission. ABC reported that Virginia Giuffre made no allegations of wrongdoing by Trump, and in that same reporting, she disputed prior tabloid-attributed claims about Trump flirting with her and said she did not recall seeing Trump at Epstein's homes or seeing Trump and Epstein together in the same place. That doesn't prove innocence in some cosmic sense, but it matters because we're discussing what the evidence and testimony publicly established, not what your political enemies deserve to be true. Now, let's address the rhetorical scam people run. They take three ingredients. 1, a document dump. 2, a famous name. And 3, the public's justified disgust at Epstein. And they bake a cake called guilty. No trial, no corroboration, no standards, just frosting made of outrage. That's not justice, that's fan fiction with a PDF attachment. If you're going to accuse someone of sex crimes, you'd better have something stronger than his name appears. Because by that logic, half of Palm Beach should be in a jumpsuit. Also, let's not pretend this release environment is clean and simple. AP covered the latest massive release and noted the political and public pressure, the scale of disclosure, and that officials reviewed records for redactions while acknowledging the public appetite for information may still not be satisfied. So you have two realities at once. Yes, the Epstein network involved rich and powerful people. Yes, the public wants transparency. And no, you don't get to manufacture guilt from proximity. Adults can hold multiple thoughts without spraining a moral ligament. Now let's do a practical receipts check on the specific claim you asked for. There is no evidence of any wrongdoing by Trump in any of the Epstein files. That sentence is too absolute for an honest person unless you're personally reviewed everything released and withheld, plus everything under seal. What you can say responsibly and backed by major reporting is this. Based on the publicly reported content of the releases so far, Trump is mentioned in logs and contacts, but major outlets have reported he has not been accused of wrongdoing in connection. Again, so are the cows on The View, so with Epstein, and a prominent accuser made no allegations of wrongdoing by him. That is the adult version, the version that doesn't overclaim, the version that survives cross-examination. And notice what that does to the smear merchants. They want you to say something sloppy and absolute so they can scream, "Aha! You said no evidence. But look, his name is in a document." Yes, that's the point. His name being there is not the kind of evidence that establishes criminal wrongdoing. And the reporting reflects that distinction. It's almost like evidence has definitions. Here's the standard I'm applying, and you should too. If you claim somebody committed sex trafficking or participated in abuse, you need documented acts, corroborated testimony, physical evidence, or charges supported by prosecutors. Not, "I saw a screenshot," not, "someone said a guy said a thing," not, "his name was mentioned," not, "trust me, bro." So what should a fair-minded listener conclude tonight? 1. Trump had some association with Epstein in the 1990s, including documented appearances and flight logs and a contact book in earlier releases described by ABC. 2. That association, as presented in those materials and summarized in mainstream reporting, is not presented as proof of criminal wrongdoing. 3. AP explicitly reported Trump has not been accused of wrongdoing in connection with Epstein. 4. ABC reported Geoffrey made no allegations of wrongdoing by Trump. And 5, DOJ has framed these releases as phased and subject to review redaction, which means anyone pretending they've seen everything is probably selling a supplement or running for office. Now, a final word for the people who are selectively outraged. If you actually care about victims, your energy should be aimed at who procured, who paid, who trafficked, who covered, and who escaped accountability, not at turning document mentions into a political voodoo doll. Because the Epstein story is a real horror, real victims, real crimes, real failures of institutions, if you turn that into a cheap partisan Mad Lib, you're not pursuing justice, you're exploiting the dead and the harmed for a dopamine hit. This has been the Receipts Check. Say what the evidence supports, refuse what it doesn't, and if someone demands you pick a side, pick the side of proof. It is Sunday, February 1st at 1847, and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. Let's talk about illegal immigration, sanctuary cities, and that little rhetorical hairball a loony leftist coughed up. Andy, perhaps the folks in Minnesota feel they've been invaded just like the South felt in the 1850s, leading to a civil war. Didn't you ever skip school? Have another Bud Light. You appear dependent. Perhaps some anger management. This is the modern left's entire operating system in 3 sentences. Smug ignorance, fake history, and the moral posture of someone who thinks a sneer is an argument. First, the invaded line. They accidentally stumble onto a serious point while trying to be cute. Yes, when you tell a community that it must absorb unlimited numbers of people who entered illegally, and you then criminalize the community's complaint as hate, you are manufacturing resentment. That resentment is not racism, it is the predictable human response to being told, shut up, pay the bill, and smile. But here's what they can't handle. You can oppose illegal immigration and still be perfectly capable of treating immigrants as human beings. You can say, I don't consent to lawlessness as a national policy without saying, I hate foreigners. Only a simple mind confuses the two. And simple minds are the core voter demographic for sanctuary city theater. Now, let's dismantle the sanctuary city scam, because the phrase it's legal. Say it with me. Legal. Itself is propaganda. A sanctuary city is not a sanctuary for children. It's not a sanctuary for victims. It's not a sanctuary for the rule of law. It is, in practice, a sanctuary for non-cooperation, local governments choosing to frustrate federal immigration enforcement. Not because they found a magic new moral principle, but because it makes for good press and cheap virtue. They get to preen for cameras while exporting the real costs: housing, schooling, emergency medical care, policing strain to neighborhoods and working families who didn't sign up to be the shock absorbers of elite ideology. And it gets uglier. Sanctuary policies often create a perverse come here signal. If you advertise that enforcement is a joke, you don't just get more migration, you get more stakes. More people will risk the journey. More will be exploited by smugglers. More will be stuffed into unsafe housing, and then the same politicians who engineered the magnet will clutch pearls and blame capitalism, xenophobia, or the phase of the moon. That's not compassion, that's negligence in a halo. Now back to our loony commentator. Notice the moves. 1. Minnesota feels invaded just like the South felt in the 1850s. Translation: I want to invoke Civil War vibes because it flatters my fantasy that you're the villain in a movie and I'm the brave resistance. But the 1850s comparison is historically sloppy. The Civil War was not triggered by feeling invaded. It was the culmination of irreconcilable conflict over slavery, constitutional power, and political economy, an argument about whether a human being could be owned. If you're going to drag that era into a debate about immigration enforcement, at least have the intellectual honesty to admit you're just using the bloodiest chapter of American history as a rhetorical prop. And here's the irony. The sanctuary crowd loves to style itself as anti-slavery team while endorsing policies that supercharge the trafficking pipeline and the underground labor market, where the powerless get exploited precisely because the system is illegal, shadowy, and easily abused. 2. Didn't you ever skip school? That's not an argument, it's a confession. It says, I don't actually have facts, so I'm going to cosplay as a teacher. Congratulations, you've weaponized the tone of a substitute teacher who lost control of the classroom. 3. Have another Bud Light. You appear dependent. This is classic leftist projection. They moralize dependence while building entire political machines around making people dependent on government benefits, on services, on the permanent crises they keep manufacturing. They don't want citizens, they want clients. And then the grand finale, perhaps some anger management. Ah yes, the therapeutic mic drop. When the left runs out of logic, it reaches for diagnosis. Not you're wrong, but you're unwell. Not debate, but pathology. That's an authoritarian instinct in its purest form. Disagreement becomes a symptom. Now the actual policy question. What do? We start by saying something that should be obvious, but apparently isn't. A country without borders is not a country. Borders are not hate. They are the definition of a political community who owes what to whom and under what rules. If you erase the line, you don't create universal love, you create administrative chaos, wage pressure at the bottom, overwhelmed local services, and a black market for labor that punishes the most vulnerable. So here are the sober adult principles that Sanctuary Crowd refuses to say out loud. 1. Enforce the law consistently. Selective enforcement is not mercy, it's arbitrariness. I'm kind of watching this and going, yeah, my wife coming in naked would be kind of cool right now. Arbitrariness breeds contempt. Two separate legal immigration from illegal entry. Legal immigrants waited, complied, paid, and took risk through proper channels. Treating illegal entry as morally equivalent is a slap in the face to people who did it right. 3. Stop turning cities into billboards for non-compliance. Local governments can have policy preferences, but they don't get to sabotage baseline enforcement while demanding federal money to clean up the fallout. 4. Put the incentives back in order. If the practical message is you will get in and stay in, you will get more illegal entry. If the message is you will be returned, the flow changes. Humans respond to incentives, especially when they're risking their lives. 5. Drop the moral blackmail. You can care about human dignity and still defend sovereignty. In fact, a functioning system is the only thing that prevents chaos and exploitation. Now, to Minnesota or anywhere else feeling pressure, if a community says, we can't absorb this, the correct response is not, shut up, bigot. The correct response is, what capacity do you actually have, and what rule structure controls the inflow? Because pretending capacity is infinite is not compassion. It's a lie told by people who won't live with the consequences. And to the loony commentator, if your best move is Bud Light and anger management, you are not participating in a debate. You're performing a social ritual for your tribe. Signal virtue, sneer at dissent, and go back to sleep convinced you've won. But adults don't govern with sneers. Adults govern with rules. Sanctuary cities are not sanctuaries, they are stages. And the people paying for the tickets didn't even buy admission. It is Tuesday, February 3rd at 12:45 p.m. and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. There's my wife with her clothes on. Let's clear the fog, because this is one of those debates where people weaponize words like they're smoke grenades. Two words get tossed around like they're interchangeable. Equality and equity. They are not the same thing. And if you don't define them, you get cornered into endorsing a political project you never agreed to. Equality, in plain English, is about the rules. Same standard, same measurement, same expectation. You don't get graded on your vibes, you get graded on your performance. Equity, the way it gets pushed in modern politics, is about the result, not the rules, not the process, the outcome. And here's the problem. Equality of outcome is impossible because human beings are not identical units. We are not factory parts. We are not mass-produced. We are widely uneven in talent, temperament, discipline, intelligence, strength, speed, health, and risk tolerance. Some people are built like draft horses, some are built like race cars, some are built like librarians, some are built like demolition crews, and some people, let's be honest, are built like a failed group project. So when someone sells you equity as,
Are you fucking getting it yet?
most American feminists are built like, failed group projects. Did you know that the average American female weighs 170.5 pounds at 5'4" tall? Why did you marry a Brazilian? Fourth wave feminism and KFC. We will make the outcome equal. What they are really saying is we will force reality to stop being real. And since reality will not cooperate, the only way to produce equal outcomes is coercion. Not persuasion, not inspiration, coercion. Because if two people start with different abilities and make different choices, they will end up with different results. That is an injustice, that's life. Now, some people hear this and immediately panic. They think you're saying, so we should treat people unfairly. No. Equality is treating people the same under the same standard, based on what they do and what they can do. You don't hand a welding exam to a guy who's never held a torch and then scream oppression when he fails. You don't put a featherweight in a ring with a heavyweight and then call physics bigotry. You match expectations to reality. Here's a simple way to see it. Imagine two intelligent people. One is brilliant with numbers, the other is brilliant with words. They're both smart, just in different directions. So you might have different conversations with them, different topics, different depth, different angles, but you can still treat them equally. You recognize intelligence when you see it, you respect it, and you engage it. Different strengths, same respect. That's equality. Now, imagine two idiots. And yes, idiots come in every flavor. One's white, one's black. I'm going to treat both of them equally as two fucking idiots. Because stupidity does not become noble when you paint it a new color. And it does not become marginalized when it refuses to learn. There is no racial exemption for being wrong. This is where people start squirming because modern politics is addicted to ranking human beings by group identity. But here's the ugly truth they don't want to say out loud. There are only two real classes that matter in everyday life: smart and stupid. And I don't mean credentialed versus uncredentialed. I mean people who can think, learn, adapt, and take responsibility versus people who can't, won't, or refuse to. Once you start sorting the world by competence instead of color, most of the manufactured hysteria collapses. Because the minute you stop pretending stupidity is a sacred cultural identity, the whole grift gets harder to run. Now, let's talk about why equity is so attractive to politicians, bureaucrats, and ideological activists. Because equity lets them move the goalpost from fair rules to approved results. If outcomes must be equal, then someone has to control the distribution. And who gets to control it? They do. Equity is not just a moral claim, it's a power claim. It demands more monitoring, more enforcement, more committees, more compliance training, more boxes to check, more rationing of opportunity, more punishment for excellence if excellence produces unequal results, because equity can't tolerate differences that are naturally produced by different abilities and different choices. So it has to either 1, deny those differences exist, or 2, crush them until the spreadsheet looks emotionally satisfying. And here's the punchline nobody wants to admit. If you want equal outcomes, you must either lower the strong or lie about the weak. That's it. Those are your options. You can't redistribute talent. You can't legislate IQ. You can't pass a law that makes disciplined people lazy and lazy people disciplined, at least not without destroying the whole system. Equality says, here's the standard, do your best. Results will vary. Equity says, results must match, therefore we will rig the system until they do. And the rigging always looks like help in the brochure, but it never stays that way. Because once you train people that outcomes are guaranteed, you also train them that responsibility is optional. Now, I can already hear the comeback. But Shawn, equity just means fairness. Okay, fine. Let's use that word, fairness. Fairness is not the same as sameness. Fairness is not a guarantee of equal trophies. Fairness is the same rules applied the same way without favoritism. If you want to argue for fairness, good, I'm with you. But if by fairness you mean the scoreboard must be equal, then you're not talking about fairness, you're talking about outcome management. And outcome management is just central planning with better PR. Let me translate the political dialogue. Central planning with better PR means socialism. For you. When they say we need equity, what they often mean is we need the ability to discriminate openly until our preferred group statistics look better. And they call that justice, but it's not. Which hasn't happened yet because, well, Chicago has not voted for a Republican since 1923. Not justice, it's arithmetic with a moral costume. Here's the real world. When you chase equal outcomes, you do not eliminate bias, you invent new bias and institutionalize it. You don't end discrimination, you just change the direction of the discrimination and pretend it's progress. Equality says no special treatment. Equity says special treatment is required. And once special treatment becomes policy, you don't get unity. You get resentment. You get Thank you, Barack Obama. Permanent faction warfare. You get a society where everybody is taught to bargain for status through grievance instead of competence. And that is a recipe for decline, because civilizations don't collapse first from a lack of slogans. They collapse when competence is replaced by compliance. When excellence becomes suspicious. When merit becomes offensive. When standards get called violence because they expose who prepared and who didn't. Now, I'm not saying people don't face obstacles. Of course they do. Life is obstacles. Some people get a better starting line. Some people get hit with hardships early. Some people have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. That's real. But the solution isn't to demand that the finish line be dragged backwards until everybody crosses at the same time. The solution is to clear unnecessary barriers, reward effort, and keep the standard honest. Because without honest standards, you don't uplift anyone. You just create a society that lies to people until reality humiliates them. So here's the difference in one clean sentence. Equality is equal roles. Equity is equal results. Equality respects the diversity of human capability. Equity denies it, then punishes people when reality confuses to comply. And if you want a world where racism actually fades, here's a radical idea. Stop teaching people to view each other as skin tones competing for state-sponsored spoils. Start teaching them to view each other as individuals. Some smart, some stupid, most somewhere in between, whose choices matter. Because when you stop worshiping identity and start respecting competence, you don't need 1,000 theories. You just need standards. And the best part, stupidity doesn't get to hide behind melanin. Stupidity doesn't get to hide behind whiteness. Stupidity doesn't get to hide behind anything. It either improves or it stays what it is. That's equality. That's reality. And reality does not need your permission. It is Monday, February 9th at 10:15 a.m. and you're listening to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. Let's run an honest experiment. One feminism absolutely hates. Compare what people say to what people do, because the modern social contract is basically this. Men get shamed into duty, women get praised for preferences, and everyone pretends the math still works. Today's segment is called the Chivalry Audit, because I'm tired of hearing lectures from people who couldn't pass a basic risk and responsibility inspection without filing a grievance against reality. So I was watching Andrew Wilson, his show Destroying Feminists, and two claims jumped out. Claim 1, men will die for women, women will not die for men. And immediately the protest choir starts warming up. What about childbirth? Okay, let's talk like adults. Women do not die for a man in childbirth. They die, rarely in modern countries with modern medicine, because pregnancy has medical risk. The moral object of that risk is not a man, it's a child, a distinct person whose existence becomes the center of the sacrifice. So when someone tries to spin childbirth into dying for men, they're not making a moral argument, they're running a bait and switch, swapping the child for the man so they can cash in on the hero narrative while dodging the responsibility narrative. And if you want to talk about dying for, you need intent and direction. A firefighter dies pulling strangers out of a burning building. That's dying for others. A person who dies from complications in a biological process did not choose death, they accepted risk. That's still courage, that's still sacrifice, but it's not the same category as I will step into violence so you don't have to. And that category, voluntary exposure to violence, has historically been male-coded, socially enforced, and institutionally expected. Not because men are magical, because men were the disposable sex in the social architecture of survival. That's not poetry, that's anthropology. Now, claim 2, women in the military. Women can do what men can do. No, not at the population level, not in the tasks that determine whether people live or die under fire. This is where ideology melts when it touches a rucksack. War is not a TED Talk. War is logistics, endurance, and violence. It's load-bearing movement under stress, sleep deprivation, heat, cold, hunger, fear, and chaos. You can find exceptional women. Of course you can. You can also find men who can't carry their own gear without wheezing like a vacuum cleaner with asthma. But policy isn't written for outliers. Policy is written for averages and probabilities because bullets don't care about your HR-approved self-esteem. And the hard truth is, in many combat roles, the physical requirements are not sexist. They're deadline requirements set by physics and biology. Now watch what happens next. When you say this out loud, the rebuttal is almost always emotional theater. You just hate women. You're afraid of strong women. You're misogynist. Translation, I don't have an argument, so I'm going to try to socially punish you into silence. That's not persuasion, that's coercion wearing lip gloss. Let's zoom out. Men fought and died for political rights. That's not an insult to women. It's a historical description of how states extracted obligation from men in exchange for limited dignity. In many countries, the right to vote was explicitly linked to duties like conscription, taxation, property obligations, militia service, and civic liability. Over time, suffrage expanded. In many cases, women received the same civic rights without the same civic burdens, especially military burdens. And you can argue that's just. You can argue that that's progress. Fine. But you don't get to deny the asymmetry and still pretend you're the one doing equality. Equality is not a vibe. Equality is a ledger. Here's the point most people are allergic to. Rights without responsibilities produce entitlement. Responsibilities without rights produce resentment. And modern Western politics have spent decades maximizing both at the same time, like a government-funded insanity machine. Men are told, protect us, provide, don't be toxic, be vulnerable, but also don't make it our problem. And if you're failing, it's because you're privileged. Women are told, you can have it all, you owe nobody anything. Every preference is empowerment. Every consequence is oppression. And if you're failing, it's because you were held back. And then everyone acts confused when families collapse, birth rates crater, and people treat commitment like a software subscription they can cancel when the interface annoys them. Now, about that line, women won't die for a man. Let's not turn it into cartoon warfare. The deeper question is, what do we culturally reward? A society that rewards women primarily for attractiveness and self-expression will get more attractiveness and self-expression. A society that rewards men primarily for utility and sacrifice will get more utility and sacrifice. And if you train men to be expendable and women to be untouchable, you get an unstable civilization where the people asked to uphold the structure are the same people being told they're the problem for existing. That's a recipe for quiet collapse. So what's the sane way to frame this? 1. Stop lying about biology. Men and women are equal in dignity. They are not identical in capability distributions. Pretending otherwise is not compassion, it's sabotage. 2. Stop smuggling rights in through the front door while sneaking duties out the back. If you want equal status, you need to talk about equal burden sharing, or you need to openly justify why burden sharing should be unequal. 3. Stop using insults as arguments. Racist, misogynist, insecure, incel. These are not arguments. They're social nukes used by people who can't win a debate in daylight. Now let me sharpen the blade. If you're a feminist who genuinely wants equality, here's your challenge. Name the obligations you want women to carry culturally and institutionally at the same rate men carry them. Not symbolic stuff, not emotional labor fan fiction. I mean real costs. Conscription, hard physical standards that do not move for feelings, legal liabilities, risk exposure, resource provision under pressure, the social expectation that if danger shows, you go toward it. If you want the perks of the front row, you don't get to refuse the price of the stage. And if your answer is, well, women shouldn't have to do that, then congratulations, you just admitted you don't want equality. You want protection plus power. You want the privileges of the adult and the exemptions of the child. That's not empowerment, that's aristocracy. One more thing, none of this is hatred of women. It's a hatred of lies, especially lies to get people killed, bankrupt, imprisoned, or emotionally destroyed, while activists clap for themselves like trained seals at a nonprofit gala. Women are not weak, men are not evil, but nature does not negotiate, and civilizations that build policy on pretend physics eventually collide with real physics. So, yes, Men historically fought and died for the political order that later expanded rights to women. That can be read as noble, it can be read as pragmatic, it can be read as exploitive, but it cannot be honestly read as men did nothing and women did everything. Because the graveyards disagree, the draft registries disagree, and the casualty lists disagree. And history, actual history, not activist bedtime stories, disagrees. That's the chivalry audit. So here's the summary. Clean and undeniable. When a man can't win on substance, he reaches for status. When a movement can't defend its claims, it retreats into labels. When a culture wants rights without burdens, it invents slogans to hide the ledger. The one-up guy can't argue, he preens. The fashion screamer can't define tyranny, he performs. And the modern equality pitch too often means power with exemption. If you want to disagree, do it like an adult. Quote the claim, refute the claim, show your standard, and tell me what would change your mind. If all you've got is sneering, diagnosing, and meme-grade contempt, save it for someone you can intimidate. This is Shawn thinking out loud. Like, subscribe, share it with the one person you know who still thinks insults count as evidence. And I'll see you next time.
Every time I try to stand